The crown screamed, not in words, not in any language known to flesh or circuit. It screamed across dimensions. And everyone, from the plasma monks of Uri, 3 to the dream binders of Holomoon, heard it. The queen was still alive, but the crown had chosen another, a girl not born of royal blood, a girl from a dead planet, a girl who didn't even know the galaxy still existed. The sanctuary of echoed stars hovered in the dark scene between galaxies, an impossibly vast construct shaped like a lotus carved from comet ice and dark matter. It pulsed with starlight stolen from dying suns. Every 1,000 years, it bloomed open, and tonight, it glowed with prophecy. Within its petals lay the arena of succession, where the future of the galaxy would be decided, not by blood, but by will. Tens of thousands gathered in the spiral terraces, each platform tailored for beings of unimaginable variety. On the lower tier, the Zirthi, liquid serpents in containment fields, swirled in synchronized motions, translating emotion into color. Beside them, the Graykle tribes, plated in stone and pulsing with magma veins, stomped ceremonial war patterns that shook the arena's bones. Floating above them were the Shioni, sentient light forms that flickered in impossible fractals, conversing in ultraviolet. And at the very center, levitating in anti-grav fields, encased in a quantum prism, was a crown, not forged, not made, born, alive, awake, and silent. For the first time in 10,000 years, it had summoned all claimants, and for the first time ever, it had whispered a name no one in the arena recognized. Elia, from a dead world, from the ash belt, from nowhere. The arena, built to contain supernovae and hold peace between species who'd once warred across centuries, now trembled. The crown had chosen, and no one knew why if confidence had a smell. The preparation chamber reeked of it, oiled armor, sacred dust, charged ethereum coils. Champions from across the stars stood in silence, some levitating midair, others kneeling in ancestral rites. They wore regalia woven from solar silk, armor that hummed with AI consciousness, and tattoos that moved like living code. And then Elia walked in, covered in ash, wearing a patch jacket made from parachute nylon and scrap leather. One boot was a size too big. The other had a hole in the sole. She stopped halfway through the chamber, looked around, and muttered, smells like burnt battery acid in here. Eyes turned, hundreds of them, some not even on faces. An 8-foot-tall cyborg war prince from the Polaris Trine leaned toward a floating diplomat bubble and whispered in static, "She's the one? That's the Ashborn." Elia scratched the back of her neck, then walked up to a vending unit labeled Hydro Protocol Drink Synthesizer, Royal Edition. She squinted at the controls. "Is there a regular water button? Or do I have to drink this?" She jabbed something that immediately dispensed a glowing magenta liquid that hissed. She took one sip, coughed, tastes like bubble gum mixed with pain. Somewhere, a high priest of the Ionic Order fainted. And yet, the crown pulsed. Faint, but unmistakable, a golden ripple through the sanctuary, responding to her presence. It didn't do that for the warlords, not for the Psi Elders, not for the living demigods or solar-born twins. Only for Elia. She looked up mid-sip. "Okay, what the hell was that?" Someone in the crowd muttered, "Maybe she's a decoy." Another whispered, "No, the crown doesn't lie. The tournament wasn't just a spectacle. It was a law of succession. 3 trials, 1 victor. The winner earned the right to command half the known galaxy, and no one had ever entered it by accident. Elia didn't even know the rules. She was handed a translator chip and a packet of freeze-dried rations labeled Contestant Tier 0. That was it. No armor, no prep team, no legacy. But across the chamber, clad in obsidian pulse battle robes, stood High Ascendant Varric of the Dargene lineage, firstborn of Starforge dynasty, wielding the gravity-bending blade of Eons and sole survivor of the Trinerous Civil Purge. He hadn't lost a duel in 700 years. Varric reviewed the list of contenders with a cold precision, his 4 black eyes scanning the glowing display. He paused at Elia's name, brow twitching. "Ashborn," he scoffed. His steward, a skeletal being woven from carbon strand threads, responded. "The crown pulls for her, my lord." Varric looked up, voice heavy with disdain. "So does a dying light bulb." The arena murmured with side bets. "She won't survive the first trial. Varric will end her before the sun sets." This is just political theater. But the crown, hovering above them all, glowed brighter when Elia entered the stage, still holding that weird magenta drink. She looked up at the crown, then over at Varric, who towered like a god carved from war itself. She raised one brow. "So, is this like dodgeball or a knife fight?" Trial 1 was in less than an hour. Competitors sharpened blades with nano edges, meditated midair, or uploaded ancestral combat protocols directly into their neural cores. Chanting, glowing, floating. It looked like a goddamn sci-fi opera. Meanwhile, Eli was doing squats. In the corner, next to a glowing moss fountain, wearing earbuds, blasting late 21st century punk rock. She counted each rep out loud, 37, 38, while a nearby Trivaxian monk, suspended upside down in glowing gold, slowly opened one eye. Elia noticed, pulled one earbud out. "What? Warm-up's a warm-up. Doesn't matter if you're about to jog or battle a death worm." The monk blinked, uncertain, then levitated away. Across the prep chamber, a sentient gas cluster hovered near its companion and whispered in vibrations. Is she mocking the right? No, I think she genuinely doesn't care. Fascinating. She sat down next and started tying her boot with wires she'd pulled from a broken drone when a formal attendant approached to offer ceremonial bracers. She just said, "No thanks. Metal gives me rashes." Instead, she took a swig of that same cursed magenta drink, made a face, and added, "Still disgusting." In the observation gallery, a scholar from the archive of Ian scribbled furiously. Subject Elia, psychological outlier, demonstrates extreme non-compliance with sacred tradition, possibly mad, possibly genius, possibly both. And just as the trial gates opened with a chorus of dimensional horns, Elia cracked her knuckles, gave a loose thumbs up to the crowd, and muttered, "Well, time to wing it." Adrian's journey through the tournament was nothing short of extraordinary. His first opponent, a towering behemoth with arms like tree trunks and the name Titanium Fist, was famous for his brute strength and unyielding resilience. The crowd gasped as the massive fighter squared up, ready to obliterate anyone in his path. But Adrian wasn't fazed. As the bell rang, the Titan lunged forward, fists raised like battering rams. Adrian, cool as ever, sidestepped with an exaggerated spin and, without warning, threw a handful of glitter directly into his opponent's eyes. The Titan blinked in confusion, pawing at his face. "Is that glitter?" The referee shouted, equally baffled. Adrian shrugged with a smirk. A little sparkle never hurt anyone. In the next round, Adrian faced Madame Mirage, a master illusionist who could create lifelike duplicates of herself, making it nearly impossible to tell which one was the real threat. The arena was filled with shifting images of the woman, each more seductive and dangerous than the last. But Adrian had a different plan. Instead of engaging with the phantoms, he pulled out a whoopee cushion and strategically placed it beneath one of the illusions. As Madame Mirage stepped over it, the distinct sound echoed across the arena. Her concentration faltered, and all of her illusions vanished in a puff of smoke. Adrian grinned. "I guess I did break the silence," he quipped, earning a few chuckles from the crowd. The third match brought Adrian face-to-face with the Quantum Monk, a being capable of projecting complex thought patterns that could disorient and even paralyze opponents with their own doubts. The monk's aura shimmered with mental energy, and Adrian felt the waves of confusion ripple through him. His mind buzzed with unsettling whispers. But Adrian had an unconventional trick up his sleeve. Instead of trying to resist a mental barrage, he closed his eyes and began humming 99 bottles of beer at full volume. The monk's translator buzzed in confusion, trying to decode the dissonant tune. What is this technique? Adrian continued his off-key rendition, much to the monk's horror. Eventually, the monk faltered, unable to focus. His mind scrambled to make sense of the inane melody. Adrian capitalized on confusion, dispatching the monk with a simple, well-placed flick of his wrist. By the time Adrian reached his fourth opponent, Shadow Strike, a master of stealth with the ability to meld into shadows, he had become a legend in the making. The ninja-like figure was nothing short of terrifying, flickering in and out of sight like an unstoppable force. Adrian, however, was ready. As the match began, Adrian nonchalantly pulled out a laser pointer and aimed it toward the ground. The red dot danced in a frenzy, moving erratically. Shadow Strike, who had relied entirely on his ability to blend into the dark, couldn't resist the challenge. He darted toward the dot, trying to catch it. For a solid minute, he chased the light, completely forgetting about Adrian. "Gotcha," Adrian said with a wink, as his opponent was caught completely off guard. Adrian's ability to think outside the box, mixing humor, misdirection, and sheer audacity, became his secret weapon. The crowd roared in admiration, knowing they were witnessing the rise of something truly different in a world that valued tradition. As each round passed, the odds seemed stacked against him, but Adrian's unorthodox style was starting to rewrite the rules of combat itself. Zixo, the reigning champion of the tournament, leaned back in his private chamber, his elongated fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest. His reptilian eyes flickered over the holographic screens in front of him, each displaying Adrian's unorthodox victories. The footage rolled. The glitter bomb, the whoopee cushion, the laser pointer, each match more baffling than the last. His scales shifted through an array of colors, from a deep shade of red to a pulsing amber. His mind, usually so disciplined and precise, churned with agitation. "This human," Zixo muttered under his breath, his voice low and almost mechanical. "He doesn't follow the rules. He defies them." He clenched his fists, the sharp claws digging into the plush leather. Tradition, combat, the sacred art of battle. These were his foundation. Zixo had spent years training, mastering the ancient forms, honing every move to perfection. The art of combat was not just a fight. It was an intricate dance, a series of steps handed down through generations of warriors. To break tradition was to desecrate the very essence of the contest. And yet, Adrian's victories made a mockery of all that. As Zixo watched Adrian's match against Titanium Fist, his irritation grew. The giant, a symbol of raw power and unbridled strength, had been brought to confuse halt by a handful of glitter. It was an affront to everything Zixo stood for. The Titan had been a true fighter, yet Adrian had reduced him to a child, caught in the most childish of distractions. "This is absurd," Zixo thought, narrowing his eyes. "Where's the honor in this? The discipline? The respect for the tradition of combat?" He watched as Adrian dispatched the illusionist Madame Mirage with a simple prank, a whoopee cushion. Zixo's mind reeled. It was as if Adrian didn't even care about the core principles of the tournament. The very idea of outwitting an opponent instead of overpowering them. How could that be considered combat? Zixo's lip curled into a sneer as he replayed the footage of Adrian's fight against Shadow Strike. The cloaked ninja, slipping in and out of shadows, was the epitome of stealth, a true master of his craft. But instead of confronting him with strategy or force, Adrian had used a laser pointer, a toy, a child's tool. The ninja had been reduced to nothing more than a confused animal chasing light. This is not combat. This is chaos. Zixo leaned forward, his claws digging into the console. His frustration was beginning to shift into something darker, a gnawing sense of dread. Adrian wasn't just breaking the rules. He was breaking the game itself. And worse still, he was doing it with such ease. He wasn't relying on the precision of his strikes or the wisdom of age-old techniques. Instead, Adrian's strength lay in his unpredictability, his ability to think outside the conventional boundaries of battle. And that was something Zixo couldn't predict. He leaned back in his chair, his cold eyes narrowing. This was more than just a contest of crown. It was a fundamental challenge to everything Zixo had come to believe. The traditions that had shaped his existence were suddenly under siege, and Adrian, in his absurdity, was the agent of this rebellion. He is not a fighter, Zixo thought, his tail lashing restlessly behind him. He is a trickster, a jester in the guise of a warrior. But he is dangerous. Zixo's mind churned with plans, each more intricate than the last. to defeat Adrian. He would need to adapt, to do what he'd always avoided, to break from tradition. His gut twisted at the thought. But if he wanted to retain the crown, to maintain the order of combat as it was, he would have to face this threat head-on. The holograms flickered once more. Adrian, standing triumphant, grinning as the crowd cheered. Zixo's lips tightened, his thoughts hardening like stone. I will not let this madness spread. The tradition of combat will not be destroyed by a fool's games. He stood, a decision forming in the depth of his mind. Adrian might have broken the rules, but Zixo would show him what it truly meant to fight, and he would do so with the precision, the calculated brutality, that only someone who understood the essence of combat could wield. This would be no game. This would be a battle for the very soul of the tournament. A.S. Adrian made his way to the semifinals. An almost palpable tension hung in the air. The grand arena, a vast coliseum surrounded by holographic projections of champions past, buzzed with anticipation. Spectators from across the galaxy had gathered to witness the final stages of the last crown, but few could have anticipated the spectacle that was unfolding before them. The betting markets, usually a flurry of statistics, odd and mathematical projections, had turned into a chaotic mess of flashing red screens. Error. Does not compute. Blinked repeatedly across every major interface, leaving the audience baffled. No one could understand it. How could a human, with no apparent technique, no traditional training, make it this far? And yet, there Adrian was, standing tall at the edge of the arena, preparing for the semifinals. The officials, normally stern and unwavering, exchanged uneasy glances. They had never encountered a contestant like Adrian. In the history of the last crown, every champion had adhered to the code, honor, skill, and strategy. But Adrian's approach? It was something entirely different. His methods weren't about power, precision, or ancient techniques. No, Adrian was a wild card, an unpredictable, chaotic force that defied every expectation. And it was working. Competitors whispered in dark corners, eyes wide with disbelief. Some were furious. Others were fascinated. Titanium Fist, still nursing his pride from his early defeat, watched from the sidelines, muttering under his breath. This isn't right, he growled, shaking his head. That's not fighting. It's a joke. Madame Mirage, ever the tactician, had been quieter since her defeat. She sat cross-legged in her corner, her eyes narrowing as she studied Adrian's matches. The usual strategy she had relied on, mind games, illusions, deception, seemed utterly useless against him. He didn't play by the rules. He didn't even care about the rules. He's unpredictable, she muttered. That's his strength. He's not like us. He doesn't need to be. Across the arena, Shadow Strike paced nervously, his once confident demeanor now slipping. He had been embarrassed by the laser-pointer trick, outwitted in front of thousands. His hand twitched as he remembered the glowing red that had disrupted his focus. Adrian had made him look foolish, something no warrior of his caliber ever expected to happen. Who does this human think he is? But it wasn't just the defeated competitors who were rattled. The audience, usually buzzing with eager predictions, had fallen into a stunned silence. They had come to witness a battle of wits, of might, of tradition. Instead, they were seeing something entirely new. Something strange. How is he doing this? A spectator murmured, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and confusion. No one fights like this. He doesn't even seem to be trying. The crowd's mood fluctuated between disbelief and admiration. Some cheered, captivated by the sheer audacity of Adrian's methods. Others were disgusted, frustrated that the sacred art of combat was being dismantled right before their eyes. It was a kind of disruption that made people uncomfortable, unsure of what was real anymore. Adrian wasn't playing the game. He was breaking it. As Adrian stood in the center of the arena, facing his semi-final opponent, Zixo, the atmosphere grew even tenser. Zixo, the very embodiment of tradition and precision, loomed like an immovable force, his cold gaze never leaving Adrian's face. To him, this was more than a match. It was a battle for the very soul of the tournament. And Adrian, this reckless jester, was threatening to tear it all apart. The crowd grew silent as the two locked eyes. Adrian, as calm and unbothered as ever, cracked his knuckles with a casual grin. Zixo, however, stood rigid, his every muscle tense with anticipation. The battle wasn't just for the crown anymore. It was for respect, for the integrity of combat itself. And as the bell rang, the weight of the tournament, its legacy, and the very tradition of battle seemed to hang in the air. The stakes had never been higher, and no one knew what would happen next. The final showdown had arrived. The arena was alive with energy, the air thick with the anticipation of an epic battle. The audience, a sea of spectators from every corner of the galaxy, held their breath as the two contenders stepped into the center of the arena. On one side stood Zixo, the master of tradition, a towering figure of calculated precision. His every movement was an embodiment of decades of discipline, his posture flawless, his mind a razor-sharp instrument honed by years of practice. On the other side, Adrian, the wild card, the human who defied every expectation, the jester in a world of warriors. His approach was unorthodox, unpredictable, chaotic. The bell rang, and for a moment, the arena seemed to freeze. Zixo moved first, launching into a series of fluid, precise strikes that blurred with deadly intent. Each move was calculated, a display of years of training in the ancient arts of combat. His limbs flowed like liquid, cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. His eyes locked onto Adrian with laser focus, analyzing every twitch, every muscle, every potential opening. Adrian, in contrast, didn't even flinch. He merely took a step back, then spun on his heel, dramatically dodging Zixo's attacks by an inch. The crowd gasped, but Adrian only shrugged nonchalantly. "Nice try," he called out, his voice casual, almost bored. Zixo's lips twitched into a slight sneer, but he didn't slow. Instead, he shifted tactics, summoning a shimmering sphere of energy that hovered around his fist. With a sharp motion, he sent a barrage of forceful energy blasts toward Adrian, each one moving with impeccable precision. Adrian grinned, seemingly undisturbed. As the blast approached, he pulled out a plastic slingshot from his pocket. Nothing more than a toy, really, and began launching small pebbles back at the energy orbs. The first pebble hit an energy blast square in the center, causing the orb to explode in a shower of sparks. The second pebble deflected another blast off course. The crowd erupted into laughter and applause. "Talk about a rock-solid defense," Adrian said, tossing his slingshot into the air and catching it like it was just another fun distraction. Zixo's eyes narrowed. This was not a fight. This was a circus, a mockery of everything he stood for. The elegance, the discipline, the ancient principles of combat. They all felt like distant memories in the face of Adrian's absurdity. With a roar of frustration, Zixo launched into his most powerful attack, a legendary temporal assault. His form blurred as he manipulated the flow of time itself, creating an intricate mandala of time loops that swirled around Adrian, trapping him in a web of shifting moments. The air crackled with the sound of bending time, and for a moment, Adrian seemed to vanish within the loops, his movements frozen in place. But then, to Zixo's shock, Adrian's voice rang out from within the temporal web. "Hey, Zixo, I think I've got something for this," Adrian said, his tone lighthearted. He pulled out his phone and tapped it with a dramatic flourish. The crowd could hear the click of a metronome app as it began ticking away, a rhythmic tick-tock that filled the arena. "Turns out resonant frequencies work wonders in temporal constructs," Adrian added with a grin, watching as the loops around him began to distort and slow down. The ticking sound seemed to disrupt the very fabric of Zixo's time manipulation, causing the loops to collapse and unravel. Zixo's eyes widened as his attack faltered. The sheer audacity of Adrian's response left him momentarily speechless. His carefully crafted temporal web, a technique passed down for generations, was being unraveled by a phone app. The sheer ridiculousness of it all was almost enough to make Zixo lose focus. With a growl, Zixo reverted to his traditional combat style, dashing toward Adrian with a flurry of strikes. But Adrian didn't even seem to notice. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a banana, and casually began peeling it as Zixo's fists whizzed past him. "Hey, Zixo, you want a snack?" "I think this will help with your focus," Adrian said between bites, not missing a beat. Zixo's eyes flashed with anger, his movements becoming more erratic, more aggressive. He was losing control. This was no longer a fight. It was a circus. His carefully honed technique was crumbling in the face of Adrian's absurd, unpredictable chaos. The final moment came when Zixo lunged for a decisive blow, his fist crackling with energy. Adrian, however, had one last trick up his sleeve. As Zixo's punch came toward him, Adrian didn't dodge. Instead, he jumped into the punch, his body twisting midair in an impossible corkscrew, landing directly on Zixo's back. With a firm but playful tap, Adrian reached into Zixo's shoulder pad and flicked a hidden button. The entire arena fell silent as a loud whoosh sounded from Zixo's armor. The back panel of his suit suddenly detached, revealing a strange contraption, his hidden drone pack, hovering awkwardly in the air. Adrian grinned. "Nice tech, Zixo, but you might want to secure your attachments next time." Zixo's eyes burned with rage, but it was too late. His rigid, methodical style had been thoroughly outmaneuvered by Adrian's unrelenting chaos. With a final, exaggerated bow, Adrian said, "Well, looks like I win. Guess I'm the new king of the last crown." The arena erupted into applause, half in disbelief, half in admiration. Adrian had done it. He had defeated Zixo, not through force or precision, but through sheer adaptability, creativity, and a kind of wild unpredictability that Zixo's tradition could never anticipate. The crowd's cheers were deafening, and as Adrian stood triumphantly, a new era of combat began. One where tradition wasn't a rigid set of rules, but something that could be bent, reshaped, and, above all, enjoyed. The last crown had a new champion, and his name was Adrian. The arena was still buzzing, the echoes of Adrian's victory hanging in the air like a shifting storm. Zixo, defeated but not broken, stood at the center of the ring, his pride bruised, his mind churning with thoughts of what had just transpired. Around him, the audience erupted in raucous applause, the kind reserved only for legends. Adrian's victory, though unconventional and chaotic, had shattered the rigid expectations that had governed the tournament for centuries. Adrian stood at the edge of the arena, basking in the light of his triumph. He wasn't the traditional champion the galaxy had expected. He wasn't a paragon of calculated technique or stoic discipline. No, he was a whirlwind of unpredictability, an enigma wrapped in humor and chaos. Yet, as the cheers of the crowd rang out, it became clear that he had won in a way that no one, least of all Zixo, had anticipated. As Adrian slowly made his way off the arena floor, he met Zixo's gaze. The once unshakable champion was now a figure of reflection, his posture rigid but his expression far less certain. Adrian gave him a small nod, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "You know, Zixo, I didn't exactly follow the script," Adrian said, voice light but sincere. Zixo's scales shifted to a soft blue, a sign of deep contemplation. He regarded Adrian for a long moment, as if trying to make sense of the absurdity that had just unfolded before him. "Perfection doesn't leave room for evolution," Zixo finally admitted, his voice quieter than usual, almost humbled. Adrian took a slow sip of his coffee, the cup now a familiar accessory. He raised an eyebrow, the corners of his mouth curling into a knowing smile. "Exactly. Rules aren't limits, they're opportunities," he replied, his tone unbothered, as though the entire universe had just shifted and he was the one who'd accidentally bumped into it. Zixo's gaze lingered on Adrian, as if searching for some flaw in his opponent's reasoning. But there was no flaw. Adrian's chaotic, unorthodox methods had disrupted the centuries-old traditions of the last crown, and in doing so, had unlocked something far more profound: the possibility of change. The implications of Adrian's victory rippled out across the galaxy. Spectators, many of whom had once clung to the rigid structure of combat, found themselves reflecting on what had just occurred. Had they been too obsessed with tradition? Had they confined themselves to a set of rules that ultimately stifled creativity and growth? The tournament officials, silent, for the most part, throughout the match, now looked at each other with a mixture of uncertainty and excitement. The old ways had worked for centuries, but it was clear that something new, something unexpected, had emerged. Could this be the start of a revolution in combat, where adaptability, spontaneity, and even humor had a place? Adrian's methods were disruptive, yes, but they also brought a fresh vitality to a tournament that had long been steeped in the dust of tradition. His victory wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a challenge to everything that had come before. It was a call to rethink what it meant to truly be a champion. As the crowd began to disperse, many of them still buzzing with excitement, Adrian stepped into the shadows, his victory already becoming a part of legend. But for him, the celebration wasn't about the title or the crown. It was about something simpler, proving that there was always room for something new, something bold, something different. In the quiet after the storm, Adrian paused, gazing out at the horizon. His heart still raced with the energy of the fight, but there was a stillness settling in his mind. The world had just changed, and with it, so had he. Victory wasn't just about defeating the opponent. It was about questioning the rules themselves and finding the courage to break them when necessary. He smiled, a flicker of realization crossing his face. The crown wasn't the true prize. It never had been. The true prize was a space to evolve. And with that, Adrian turned and disappeared into the night, leaving behind the echoes of a world forever changed as Adrian stepped into the cool night. The weight of the crown no longer a physical burden, but a symbol of something far more powerful. He sent a quick, casual message back to Earth. Mission accomplished. Send the rest. Far across the galaxy, the quiet hum of combat schools and training halls began to shift. In every corner of the universe, warriors adjusted their stances, recalibrating the rigid boundaries of their arts. What had once been sacred and untouchable was now open for redefinition. And in the wake of Adrian's unpredictable triumph, the ancient foundations of combat seemed more fragile than ever before. Factions that had long held power in the arena began to whisper new alliances, new techniques, and new ideas. Some strange, some borderline absurd, but all undeniably effective. Combat, they realized, was no longer just about the fight. It was about the thinking behind it. And now, with Adrian's victory, the rules had changed. Back on Earth, a new wave of students prepared for the next great challenge. Across the galaxy, officials were already scrambling, preparing for the unknown that Adrian's methods had unleashed. And as Adrian tossed his phone into his bag and disappeared into the horizon, he left one final thought hanging in the air, his voice a quiet echo over the comms. You can't fight progress, but you sure can try to outrun it. The galaxy held its breath. What would come next? If you'd like to see part 2, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.